From EE Tech Media, this is Moore's Lobby, where engineers gather to talk all about circuits. I'm Daniel Bogdanoff. Today in the lobby, we're joined by two absolute powerhouses in our industry, Dave Doherty, President and COO of Digi-Key, and Joe Nelligan, the CEO of Molex. It's hard to understate how impactful both Molex and Digi-Key are in the world of electronics and electrical engineering, and I am personally very excited to hear about the state of the industry today, because it's been a wild couple years. And this episode is sponsored by ExcelPoint. ExcelPoint is one of the leading regional B2B platforms providing quality electronic components, engineering design services, and supply chain management to OEMs, ODMs, and EMS in the Asia-Pacific region. Dave, Joe, thank you for being here. Dave, starting with you, can you give me some background about what you do and what DigiKey is all about?
Yeah, you bet. My name's Dave Doherty. I'm president of Digi-Key. I joined Digi-Key 14 years ago, and I've been in this current role for the last 7. Digi-Key is a distributor of components, which basically means we don't make anything. It's our key partners like Joe and his company, Molex, that provide product to us. And we have product for over 900 manufacturers, 2.7 million that we stock and maintain in stock here to be able to service those engineering builds, those low, medium-sized production quantity product shipping out of beautiful Thief River Falls in Northwest Minnesota.
Awesome. And Joe, what's your role and what is Molex all about?
Yeah, Daniel, I'm Joe Nelligan. I'm the CEO of Molex. I've been with the company 38 years. I started as an engineering intern after my sophomore year in college and have the fortune of being the CEO the last 4 years. We're a leading global interconnect solutions provider. We've been in business for 84 years, family founded here in Chicago, but now have a really large global footprint with over 80 facilities around the globe. We design and manufacture in every geography for our customers. And we like to say that we enable the technology that makes a connected world possible and that is transforming the future and at the same time improving people's lives.
Wonderful. And I want to hear more about the intern to CEO journey, but hopping back to Dave, can you tell me about some of your early roles in technology and how you landed at Digi-Key doing what you do?
When I listened to Joe, it reminded me how quickly you go from the young guy in a room to the older guy in the room and the experience. But, I started in engineering. It's what I'd like to think about is kind of a 360-degree view of where I am today. What does make you feel old is I started with Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, very prominent, largest employer in the state of Massachusetts, where I grew up at its time with the mini computer. I was the manufacturing engineer and the VAC 780. So, initially as a customer of companies like Digi-Key and Molex, and then transitioning to a semiconductor manufacturer as an FAE and later into sales management. And then about a decade with a competing larger public company in distribution, and then the last 14 years here. So I've been able to see as a customer, as a supplier, as a competitor, and now as an internal team member.
Fantastic. And Joe, tell me a little bit about what it's like to have spent 38 years at a company, coming in as a college intern and ending up as the CEO. What's been that journey for you?
Yeah, well, I met the then CEO of Molex. I was a tennis player growing up, and in one of my summer jobs was working at a local club, and he was playing early in the mornings and saw me, was talking to me and said, "Hey, you're an engineering student. Why don't you work in engineering versus, teaching tennis and taking care of tennis courts?" So I joined Molex the next summer after my sophomore year. And, really one of the learnings for me, interesting, not surprising, is, you learn a lot of theory about engineering in college. Then you get into the real world and you try to marry the theory with the practice. And I kind of learned right away then that you got to lean on your colleagues and peers that have practical experience. And so I worked on a bunch of different products in design, and then I led design teams and spent the first probably 10 to 12 years in development, and then got my MBA and moved into product management, kind of ran some product lines, and then into sales and marketing, and had a bunch of different experiences, lived overseas in Singapore for 4 years running part of our business. We're a very global company, so that was a key experience for me, and then came back Now, 7 or 8 years ago to be the chief operating officer and president, and then 4 years ago had the opportunity to take the CEO role at Molex.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thanks, Joe. That's a really, really cool journey to CEO. The burning question in everyone's mind is going to be supply chain. So, Joe, we'll start with you. What is the state of the supply chain in 2022? Is there a light at the end of this tunnel, or are we still just kind of stuck in the trenches here?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to get Dave's perspective. I think what we're seeing is for some of the semiconductors that we use in our products, we're still struggling with supply, and I don't expect that to break through until sometime next year in 2023. I would say in general, we use metals, plastic, other components. I would say those supply chains are normalizing to a degree. So I do think we're able to, get after our backlog and making progress with that. I think demand with interest rates going up and with inflation starting to normalize a little bit after really 2+ years of really, really strong demand. So we continue to work really aggressively to work down our backlog, working with our partners and suppliers to address any inbound supply constraints. But, the semiconductors get a lot of attention, and especially kind of analog semiconductors, microcontrollers. I think those are still going to be constrained through this year and into next year.
Dave, what are your thoughts, and what are DigiKey's thoughts on the state of supply chain?
Yeah, you bet. That certainly is the burning question. But I think you got to pause initially and just give our manufacturers, companies like Molex, a little credit. We've shipped far and away more units over the last 2 years than we ever have. And, anybody that's been in this industry for any period of time knows that there's peaks and troughs. It's just the nature of the cyclical industry that we're in. But we've got a playbook to handle many things. But a 100-year pandemic was one that our industry, hasn't had. And so you've got to go look back over the last 2.5 years. But, to get to the essence of the question, I think Joe's spot on. Our inventory has built. We are now carrying $500 million more inventory now than we were in January. So it's freeing up. What used to be, we will buy anything just in case we want to build our inventory. Customers are now saying it's those critical few parts that are killing us. I've got the passives have freed up. Joe's company has done a great job working with us and others, but the microcontrollers, the analog, the power devices that Joe alludes to, those are still those, that golden screw that's become all too common in our vernacular over the last year or so. That's companies are saying, hey, I can't take any more of X until I can get a little bit more of Y. Now, is there light at the end of the tunnel? There always is. Like I said, this isn't a new phenomenon to us, but the number of curveballs that Joe alluded to, the number of things that have hit the supply chain, we've never had complete countries that just have shut down for periods of time. Historically, it's been a flood or a fire or volcanic ash or a surge in demand. But in this particular one, so many things hit at once, it's just taking a little longer to sort out.
What sort of initiatives has DigiKey taken to adjust to this new normalization, like Joe called it?
We're in a position where we're not the guy that's going to fix everybody's ills in the supply chain. We don't go a mile deep on all this product. And so from our perspective, our suppliers have recognized that there's today's demand that we need to service, but there's always tomorrow's demand as well, that from our engineering customers. So they've done a really nice job of prioritizing our backlog to make sure that we do our best for today, but not in spite of tomorrow, but in addition to tomorrow. And so what we've, like anyone else, tried to give our manufacturers as much visibility as possible and respect their ability to, once we get that order on the systems, keep it there. Try not to pull in, push out, however we can make their lives simpler and more straightforward, because they're the key to this. We're stocking a manufacturer of parts. We don't have the complexity of the supply chain that Joe alluded to. And so we want to be good partners with them. It's the old adage, help them help us. And in turn, us being able to help those engineers and purchasing folks looking for product.
Joe, from a manufacturer's perspective, what approaches and strategies have you taken to add resilience to your supply chain?
Yeah, it's a great question, Daniel. Fortunately, prior to COVID, we had brought in a new supply chain leader really to build a more advanced and advantaged capability in that area. And one of the things we tried to do is make sure we had full transparency of our inbound and outbound supply chain, which gets fairly complicated, and it's a global supply chain. So we invested in digital tools to really understand our risk and our capability across our supply base. That's served us well with all the complexities we've had to navigate over the past few years with COVID and the geopolitical situations, what's going on in Russia, in the Ukraine. So I think we feel like the investments we have made to really understand in a digital way our end-to-end supply chain is serving us well. And that's allowing us to address concerns we get from our customers with, hey, how is Molex managing risk, not only in our own manufacturing operations around the globe, but more importantly in our own supply chains, our first tier and second tier suppliers. And we want to help our engineers too, as they're designing products. We want to have a capability so as they're developing, designing products and sourcing components and raw materials from our supply base, that they're building in the resiliency factor into their sourcing decisions.
Awesome. Yeah, the resiliency portion seems really business critical for everybody these days. I understand also Digi-Key and Molex just did a big tell-all engineering survey. Joe, have you done this sort of thing in the past? Is that new for you?
We did a bunch of surveys over the last 3 years to really better understand the voice of the customer, especially with all the disruption and opportunity that's going on in our end markets. Fortunately for Dave and I and our companies, we play in this electronics industry where there's a lot of tailwinds as you see more and more electronics getting embedded in everything we do every day in terms of how we work, live, and play. So we've done some thought leadership surveys in areas like 5G and autonomous and electric vehicles and IoT 4.0 to try to really get the pulse of both the engineering and supply chain community from our customers, and then also to impart our point of view on the trends in what's going on in the different end markets. I think this specific survey, though, was really focused on the design engineer and their specific challenges that they're facing. They're trying to simplify their processes and how they design, yet they're dealing with all this complexity, whether it's the innovation that's happening across a bunch of different parameters and now these supply chain complexities. So hearing directly from the engineers is really critical to us because we really have to build and position capability ahead of them. We want to have solutions for them in advance of the need. So really this survey that we kind of commissioned jointly with Dave and his team, I think really provided some valuable insights.
Yeah, I find that very challenging, especially being on the test gear side as well, is we have to be ready for them as they're inventing these new technologies, more or less. And staying another extra step ahead of the game is a fun and interesting challenge. Dave, one of the things that surprised me is only about half of the respondents said that the supply chain was complicating their design efforts. Did that surprise you too, or is that kind of where you expected that to?
Yeah, not really, because I've looked at this a couple of times and tried to look at it from a couple of different ways, and so I'd say you're correct in there. I think it was 56%, but it was also the number one response on what complicates their life. And remember, these are engineers. If you ask purchasing professionals, it'd probably be 99.9% of that. But the questions were also asked different ways, and we got the same response. What skill set do engineers most need to develop? And it was an awareness of supply chain. And so there were 2 or 3 different ways, and this continually came as number one, which isn't surprising, based on what we've just talked about. It's, engineers have had to think differently. They've talked about that our job isn't to design the product and throw it over the wall. We continue to be a part of that manufacturability within our company. And so it has to start early on. You have to design for manufacturability, design for purchasing ability. And I saw that voice coming out really loud and clear.
Joe, as a Molex is a company that works so closely with design engineers to get their final designs. How should these engineers, especially the half who said maybe that supply chain wasn't complicating their design efforts, how should they reframe how they think about the parts they're using and how that affects the whole design process start to finish?
Yeah, and I would say, Daniel, I do think maybe that was lower than I expected, to be honest, given what we've experienced over the the last 3 years. It probably maybe depends on kind of the complexity of their designs. I do think there is a renewed focus on understanding the supply chain. Our customers want to understand it in a lot more depth. Not only the procurement organizations, but the development organizations. And I think one of the things we've tried to do, which is I think our customers are doing the same thing, is how do we enable our engineers with the information? So as they're designing and developing their products, and they're thinking about the performance capability, they're thinking about the manufacturability, they're now also thinking about supply chain. How do we arm them with the information digitally so that is not a big time sink for them in the design process? Because we really want to focus our engineers on the activities where they can really create the most values, which is innovation and engineering, and not have to spend a lot of time on understanding the details of the supply chain. So what we've tried to do relative to kind of a digital thread is have the procurement team build that database of information relative to suppliers so the engineers can tap into that in a seamless way, because they're under a lot of pressure relative to time to market, design cycles shrinking, complexity going up. So we want to kind of take away the complexity of the supply chain and that aspect and that challenge from them so they can really focus on development. And so our customers have the same issue. So it's our job to make sure that we're arming them with the information that gives them the confidence that when they design in the Molex product, we've already captured and mitigated all that supply chain risk for them.
Joe, don't you think one of the other aspects is you guys have done such a great job of there's a proliferation of parts so that where the customer or engineer wants to be unique, they have the ability to really tune and differentiate their product. But in other areas, maybe less of a concern, maybe the safety of getting a broad-based part with a large customer base is more critical. And I think it's an area that we can do a better job of saying, what are you looking for? Are you looking for security, safety in numbers? Or are you looking for differentiation with the exact part that does something very unique that's going to differentiate your product? And if we do that, that'll also mitigate some of that risk where it doesn't need to exist.
I think that's a really good point, Dave, because engineers, they want to be creative, they want to innovate, and you just need to push them as the innovation that you're designing into your system that impacts a supplier like Molex. Do you really need that? Are you really getting value for that versus using a kind of an off-the-shelf product where, by definition, there's less risk?
So, speaking of that innovation, we also saw in that survey that roughly 65% said improved design tools are leading to or simplifying their design efforts. But at the same time, designs are getting a lot more complicated. So Dave, how are you seeing innovations and growth in the tooling and design space?
The big advancement in tooling has been the cooperation and trying to make information more ubiquitous. I'll give you an example that in the early days, we had the misconception that partners like Molex or DigiKey were competing for eyeballs on our websites, and we all wanted the traffic to come to us. And now we readily share that. And so, we kind of, understand that if customers are looking for a breadth early in their search, they tend to start at a distributor. When they want the deepest, richest information, there's no reservoir like that, like the manufacturer. But so we link to that. We link to the data sheets. Companies like Molex provide the schematic symbols and footprints that can be easily digested on our website from a breadth of suppliers into their EDA tools. So that facilitates, that tool and of course, the sophistication of the tools. It's interesting in our new warehouse across the street, it's almost like an enormous project where there's the hardware aspect and there's the software. And I would say in some ways, the hardware, the tools are doing a really good job doing some of the simulation and some of the work there. And the complexity now becomes in the software verification and that complexity.
Interesting. And then Joe, beyond just the tooling, we also saw 43% of people say design methodologies have impacted their workflows. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of those intangibles like team structure or other things that are helping beyond just design tools?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We just are making a really big investment across the company in new tools and processes, digital tools and processes for product development, manufacturing, supply chain, customer experience. And so really starting from capturing the voice of the customer in a more rigorous way digitally, then helping our engineers. Really, our focus is like, how do we allow our engineers to be more productive? How do we transform the employee experience, because allowing them to focus on what they're good at is going to allow them to create the most value, also be more fulfilled in their job. And that by doing that, they're going to change the customer experience. But then that digital thread extends into manufacturing. So we're transitioning all that digital information into our tooling and manufacturing organization. And then we're also trying to connect it, as Dave was talking about, directly to the customer. So making sure the customer has all the information they need to make decisions quickly. And we're collaborating with companies like Digi-Key, who has really, really strong digital capabilities. So we're leveraging each other's capability, not redundantly going after to trying to solve the same problem. But we want to change in the end, we want to change the customer experience. So it's more like the B2C experience they have every day, say with Amazon. And I think through the last 2.5 years with COVID, where it was not possible to interact in person with our customers, I think there's a premium on how do you make the experience in a virtual or digital fashion as effective as maybe it was in the past in a in-person fashion. And to do that, you really have to invest, I think, in more mature digital capability.
Interesting. Yeah, I've definitely seen that shift. You said B2C, that's business to consumer for people who are unfamiliar with it. How have you adapted technology innovation inside of Molex? How is that approach to a more digital and a more almost immersive type experience trickle down all the way into the far corners and reaches of Molex?
Yeah, it's interesting to start. I think maybe in the past when we kind of introduced new technology in terms of tools or processes to the organization, it was kind of always viewed as, it's an IT project. So I think first, this is like business transformation for the company, and it's kind of an imperative for us to better serve our customers and to be a preferred partner to our customers. So it starts, I think, with kind of the human action model and having our employees understand, hey, the current state is not where we want to be. Do they envision a kind of a better state? And then are we helping them connect to how we're going to get there? And in the end, for our employees, it's how do we allow them to do their jobs more effectively? I think, as you evolve over time, we have a lot of manual workarounds in our different processes. And so how do we bring in new tools and new processes that allow them to kind of avoid that human middleware to really focus on what they're good at? And by doing so, create a different experience and a more positive experience for their internal and external customers. So it's really, Daniel, a mindset change.
That makes a lot of sense. And for Dave, I don't think I could overstate how important the web page must be for DigiKey. What around that, technologies around that web page and how you run your business have been improving and changing over the last couple of years?
You bet, Daniel. It's, we've had a website since the mid 90s. It's kind of interesting to note that it's prior to an Amazon or even a Google, having a site out there. So we certainly have some history, but history doesn't buy you anything unless you're evolving as quickly as Joe alluded to. And trust me, the acceleration of the last 2 years of the needs for folks to be able to access you remotely has caused lots of changes. We've had to re-architect our search experience as a number of parts have gone from a few hundred thousands to a couple of millions. We're re-architecting our forecasting system. How can you build in machine learning so that we can do a better job forecasting to companies like Joe's on using the law of big numbers of what we see the demand shifting to? Customer experience. We used to, and still to some extent, we equate high service with high cost. Well, that they no longer have to be linked. Our customers, in many cases, they want a self-serve experience. They want a 24/7 access to information. Hey, I'm just looking for a quote, availability. I want to understand lead time. I love your folks, but frankly, I don't want to talk to you right now. Just give me what I need. And you've got our software programs, like most companies, were written in some cases decades ago, and they have to be re-architected to take advantage of things like APIs. You can't afford to batch or even EDI that's not real time. So you need to make those real-time calls internally and between partners. So when they want to know the lead time of a Molex part, we're getting it at that exact moment from Molex, and they can't be getting any more recent information. We have to put things on the cloud. We are a global company centralized in northern Minnesota. And so you want sites to render as fast anywhere in the world. To do that, you have to have your software. It has to be architected so that it can be accessed anywhere and take advantage of the cloud. But the availability of technology to do that is at an unprecedented pace, which in the end is a really good thing, but in the present can feel a little daunting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also, Dave, in that survey, we saw 43% of people saying that customer expectations were impacting their design efforts. I thought that number might be higher, but I've also seen some, customer request sheets for enhancements and that sort of thing. Does that number feel low to you? What do you think about how people responded to that question?
Yeah, the 43% did feel low because when you read some of the contextual inputs, I don't know, some of these attributes seem like they haven't changed in decades. Customers want it faster, they want it lower power, they want it smaller, and they want it cheaper. And so those expectations, I don't think we should expect will change. And that'll be our task. And I don't know of anywhere in my life that the world has changed and evolved so quickly as it has in our industry with technology and coming down that cost curve and up that performance curve. And so, again, reading between the lines, I interpret that as that's just become so normal to their lives. They're not viewing that as something different.
That makes sense. That's just kind of the way it is, I guess. Joe, when I think about the way it is, and Dave mentioned this, smaller, better, faster, higher power, from a connector standpoint, those are all pretty significant changes. Can you comment on how Molex is keeping up with increased power demands and higher frequency demands, that sort of thing?
Sure. I think you nailed the trends. There's higher bandwidth and speeds. There's smaller packages, which drives higher density. There's also thermal challenges, as you package things closer to the silicon in tighter spaces. And really from a signal integrity or electrical engineering signal quality, that's a big constraint. And we see that converging across all industries. I think fortunate for Molex, we are a broad supplier. So we have expertise in high power. We have expertise in signal integrity. We have expertise in micro miniature products that are used in mobile devices. What we're seeing now, though, is this convergence. So, where we would have really, really micro miniature products for mobile devices, they now have really high level of signal integrity requirements. So we're having to leverage expertise from the data area of our business, which has really strong capability in signal integrity, into our micro miniature business. We're also seeing kind of micro miniature applications in the vehicle. As you think about all the safety requirements in the vehicle, the cameras, et cetera. So I think what we're trying to do internally with our development teams is make sure we're connecting them together seamlessly so we can leverage that capability that maybe in the past was more relevant to one industry, but now is being used and needed in another part of the business. So it's a challenge. We're always, again, we got to stay ahead of our customers. We got to kind of innovate at a faster pace than they do. And so making sure that as we innovate across a footprint of 2,000 to 3,000 engineers all around the world working on designs collaboratively, that we've built the infrastructure that allows them to do that effectively and at the pace that's going to allow us to be a preferred partner for our customers.
Speaking of customers, what has surprised engineers as they go into these new technologies? Is there anything that has really thrown them for a loop, or these conversations that you have to have with customers that say, actually, if you're trying to connect, if you're trying to do USB PD in this situation, you have to rethink how you approach the problem. Are there any situations that design engineers should think about that they often miss?
I'll tell you from my perspective, and I'll put a little different twist on this. Is there an integrated solution that already exists? You see in that survey, and it comes out time to market. Well, the industry and our partners are doing such a good job at listening to that voice that what you may have had to design with a set of a dozen discrete components is now already integrated for you. So if time to market matters, I would go into a design knowing your experience, but also being open-minded to say, where's technology come? Whether my last design was 3 months ago or a year ago, it's very likely that strong advancements have been made. So start with a fresh perspective and ask that question. Let me resync to see what's there. Certainly you don't want to spend your time on a portion of the design that you can now get into a canned building block, and then you can build your differentiation on top of that.
Yeah. And then Joe, on your side, are there any areas in particular that have been particularly challenging for designers? And if so, how has Molex partnered with them to make it all work?
Yeah, what I would say, Daniel, is more at the making sure there's a system level approach, because you can get isolated working with a Molex, independent of working with a silicon supplier, independent of working with a thermal supplier, with the PCBA supplier. But in the end, the performance has to work in a robust fashion, in a reliable fashion at the system level. So I think making sure that you're driving collaboration with the ecosystem partners versus managing them in a more siloed fashion, I think that allows all of us to be more effective and to minimize rework and allow us to kind of get the solution to work right out of the gates first time.
Thinking through the whole thing start to finish seems to constantly be a valuable thing to do for people. Another element of that start to finish design thinking, I've seen a big trend in the phrase digital transformation, especially on the simulation digital twin side. Dave, can you tell me, what does digital transformation mean for DigiKey?
It's clearly the buzzword right after supply chain, and digital transformation is adopting digital tools, different ways of doing things. And it's going to quickly transition from the word transformation to digital journey, because we're now on this treadmill and there's no end in sight. No consumer wants to pay for waste, and speed matters. And the only way to achieve that, you hear the phrase, the speed of digital. And both of our companies, Molex and Digi-Key, have long tenured employees and team members that have a lot of tribal knowledge. So you try to eliminate the mundane, the tactical, so you can put that knowledge to use. We don't need people to come in to quote and have people look at quotes when they're looking for base pricing that exists on the web. Let the system do that for them. And so, again, whether it's some of the call-outs we talked about on APIs, or it's just thinking differently, how can you meet that customer's needs? And we're investing heavily. That is our R&D. As a distributor, we rely on Joe to have the cutting edge technology around connectivity solutions. And for us, it's going to be that speed, that bridge between that manufacturer and the customers, and all the things that you need in between to make that work.
And Joe, what does digital transformation mean in the context of Molex? And where do you see the biggest opportunity for the engineering space at large when it comes to adopting digital best practices?
Yeah, I would echo Dave's comments. It's really a mindset change, and at a high level, we got to kind of remember we're investing in digital to improve the customer experience and also improve the employee experience. So kind of what Dave was talking about, if you think about what engineers are doing every day, how do we kind of take off their plate the more transactional activity? How do we drive reuse of technology where it applies so they can really focus on innovation and core engineering? Because that's the way they're going to create the most value for their customers. Also, going to be the way that they are most fulfilled in their job. But as we look at it, it's end to end. So we have a CX, digital transformation, which is self-service capability. We're transforming our website. So we have all the information on our website where a customer is interfacing with Molex, hopefully in a way in a future that's like they interface with Amazon when they're buying goods for their home use. But then we capture the requirements from our customer digitally. We're trying to transform the design process of our products and our processes to really drive productivity for our engineers. Then through supply chain and into operations, we have all new MES tools, manufacturing execution system tools on our factory floor, supply and operations planning, connecting demand to supply. So we actually think we need to do it through customer experience, product design, manufacturing, and supply chain, end-to-end connected to really, really make a difference in the holistic experience for the customer. And I think, if we don't invest in those tools, and we don't disrupt kind of the status quo of how we do our work, then we're not going to be the partner that our customers choose, and we're going to be standing still and get passed by. So I think it's something that is imperative that you have to do. I think it accelerated over the last 3 years. I think we feel fortunate that we kicked it off prior to COVID, but we think it's something that we have to do to be an innovation leader in our industry.
That's really insightful. And I think in the last couple of years, especially, we've seen that as COVID went, I get a lot of comments about this. It's like, well, COVID made us rethink how we do everything start to finish in our business. We have here on this stream a captive audience of electrical engineers and industry professionals. So Dave, what is some advice that you have for these folks, ways that they should reshape how they're thinking about 2023 and how they're designing and sourcing parts and building end products for their customers?
We've hit on some of the key points, and unfortunately, the engineers on this call have already been doing this. Is making sure that you're looking at flexibility at the front end, alternatives, and leverage your partners, the distributor partners, your supplier partners. What I hope that you've heard over this session is we don't want to waste your time with a commercial about Molex and about DigiKey, but hopefully the sense you've gotten that both of our companies have an outside-in mentality. It really is about you on this call, not about us. You don't exist to serve Digi-Key or Molex. We exist to serve you. Our marketing mission statement, very similar to Molex, is to fuel your innovation. We're not arrogant enough to think that we're changing the world. We know you are, and we want to play that role and service that. So know that we're listening. We're listening on surveys that we commission. We're listening on feedback that comes in through the web. We're listening on comments you make to our inside sales reps. And we're listening by every transaction you do on our website. And we watch and we say, okay, this part of the website seems more meaningful. How can we tweak it? There's tweaks that happen in our experience group almost every day. This part of the site doesn't appear to be too valuable. So know that you've got resources behind you in your difficult job to come up with those end consumer-based products.
Awesome. And Joe, what proactive advice would you give to the folks on the stream?
Yeah, I would, to build on what Dave said, you have a captive audience in companies like Molex and DigiKey and our peers. And so your feedback is very valuable, and it guides us in terms of how we proactively build capability that's going to help you do your job more effectively. In the end, your success is our success. Our whole job is to make our customers successful. I think we talk about Molex to be biased to transformation and to always be constantly learning and experimenting, especially given the pace of disruption and transformation in the electronics industry. And I would say, personally, I look back on my career and, making sure that you're positioning yourself in terms of your role where you're kind of reflecting on your passions, your talents, your capabilities, and making sure you shape a role in your company where you can create the value and be the most fulfilled in your job, because that's how you're going to be the most successful. And I think one thing I always think about over my career, I got some good advice that says, hey, as you take on new opportunities and once you kind of get your feet settled in a new role, is think ahead, like what are 2 or 3 things that I really want to change and transform in this role? So as I look back, in 3 to 5 years and I take on a new assignment, I can look back at a legacy and an impact that I made from my last role in the company.
Building on that, we also get a lot of early and mid-career folks joining these calls to learn and get some direction for their careers. And we'll start with you, Dave. What sort of technologies or skill sets would you recommend these folks pick up to help them be successful in the industry for the next 3 or 4 decades?
The very first thing that I was told that is continues to resonate with me is you want to become an expert in technology, but you want to be a continual learner, because that information is as perishable as fruit at a grocery store. And so don't think when you've got out of school, thankfully, all that's behind me and now I get to leverage all my knowledge, because that knowledge has to constantly be refreshed. But a couple of other things that that I try to live by, that I was taught, is have your own personal board of directors. You're not in it alone. Success, and Joe used the word team earlier in this conversation. It really is about a team sport that we play in, that you play in. And this board of directors, this informal board of directors, who are those mentors and coaches? I've been blessed to have people like a Skip Strieber, a long-term TI guy, and then at times at a competing distributor. And George Papa worked for Altera and Intel for a long period of time. Mark Larson here, who served a short stint of 39 years as president of Digi-Key, and continually go back to those folks to look for guidance. I think, and the more you grow in your career, the more you have this false perception that you have to have all the answers. You have to be the expert. What you've got to be is a good coach, facilitator, because if you raise the performance of the people around you, the rising tide theory, takes place, and frankly, it energizes the team to think that I'm not always going to the Yoda master, but instead, we're in this together, and we're gonna work our way through challenges and opportunities together.
I love that. Joe, how about you? What advice would you give to earlier mid-career folks?
Yeah, I would, to build on what Dave said, I think we have this philosophy of always being a lifelong learner, continually be biased to experimenting and learning. I think we also talk about leveraging knowledge and, leverage kind of your network, both internal to the company and external to the company, to seek knowledge that's going to help you do your job better. And I think have a growth mindset, be positively biased, be contribution motivated. And lastly, I would say is, no one owns your career more than you. I got that feedback from John Crabeel, who was the CEO of Molex, but also recognize there's a lot of people in the organization, especially in the culture we have at Molex, and I know at DigiKey, everyone's biased to help you be successful. But you need to lean into that yourself, and you need to go out and seek knowledge, build the relationships, leverage networks inside and outside your company to help you grow and develop through your career.
And certainly have some fun along the way.
Great advice. Great advice. We're running out of time a little bit, so we like to ask some lightning round type questions at the end of each of these. My first question is, so here we have in our lobby, we have an HP 200B, like the original Disney Fantasia audio source. And to us, it's one of the coolest things that we could possibly have in our lobby. But to someone who's just walking in, it's this like weird old box with a dial on the front. So my question for you, and we'll start with you, Dave, if you had to put something, or if you could put anything in your lobby that would maybe be a nerd out moment for you, but other people might not get, what would that be?
I guess the thing that comes to mind, it should be obvious, but it's not in the lobby today, is a Digi-Keyer. Our company was founded on a kit of parts. Our founder and still our sole owner, Dr. Stordahl, was a ham radio guy. He was trying to make it easier to have more uniform dots and dashes. But it's a great reminder to know the role that serendipity plays as well. And don't be arrogant enough to think that you're going to figure everything out, because from that kit of parts, which had a fairly short life cycle, on my desk, I still have a copy of the last catalog that we ever produced, and the thickness of this, and we now have 6 times as many parts on the web. What it can lead to is, if you're curious and you're observant of what's happening, and what Ron learned early days is it wasn't the digital keyer that was so important. It was knowing that there were a ton of, we call them makers now, but entrepreneurs like him back then that needed small quantities of broken pack quantities from our manufacturers, and that became the essence of the business, not what he had preconceived in his business plan.
Interesting. That's really neat. Joe, how about you?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer that 2 ways. Kind of our origins were in an insulative material, and it was originally used for explosives during the war, and then in like flower pots, eventually into electronic ranges. So showing some of the origins of the company. To Dave's point, where you come from is not necessarily where you're at today, and I think that speaks to just having this kind of growth mindset mentality and seeking opportunities maybe where you wouldn't expect they'd exist. I think we're in the middle of redoing our lobby, so it's a timely question. I think one of the things we're going to be showing in our lobby is pictures of people experiencing our products. So someone might walk in and say, hey, I see a picture of someone kind of talking on a mobile device or on a video call or driving a car. I thought Molex was a interconnect solutions provider. But while we design and develop connectors and manufacture connectors, we enable connections that improve people's lives and kind of allow them to interact in the world a different way and drive transformation for the future. So it's really trying to highlight, what we do really makes a difference in the world and how we live, work, and play every day.
I love that. Yeah, really knowing the place that your company's roles play in the lives of both engineers, but really the entire world is a really special thing to be reminded of. Well, Dave, thank you for being here. This was a blast.
Daniel, it's always fun. I enjoy our interactions. Thank you for facilitating and hosting. And Joe, it's always good to see you. I'm sure we'll see each other sooner than later. Take care.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Daniel. Pleasure to meet you. Thanks for the opportunity, and always enjoy spending time with Dave. Thanks.
That was Joe Nelligan, the CEO of Molex, and Dave Doherty, President and COO of Digi-Key Electronics. Thank you to ExcelPoint for sponsoring this episode of Moore's Lobby. If you enjoy this podcast, make sure you are subscribed in your favorite podcast tool, and it would really help us out if you'd share this episode on social. Go check out the Moore's Lobby and All About Circuits social media pages and tag someone who you think would like this podcast. Thank you for joining me today in the lobby. I'm Daniel Bogdanoff, and I'll be right back here in 2 weeks to talk about autonomous driving with Ryan McMichael of Zoox. It's going to be a good one.